Please, let's take our seats. Madam Chief Justice and President of our Supreme Court, Madam Deputy Chief Justice, Chief Justice Emeritus, the Honorable Willie Mutunga and the Honorable David Maraga, Chief Justices from various parts of our continent, judges of the Supreme Court, distinguished judicial officers from different parts of our continent, ladies and gentlemen, and our visitors, good morning and welcome. Welcome to Nairobi and welcome to Kenya. I join Madam Chief Justice for the convener of this symposium in welcoming you to both Nairobi and Kenya. Let me volunteer some information about Nairobi and about Kenya. About Nairobi, this is the city that has a national park within 10 minutes from your hotel. So you may find some lion or cheetah because sometimes they escape from the national park. Please be careful because they are not domesticated. Welcome to Kenya. And again, on this one, I speak with the authority of a scientist, being a scientist myself, that science has proved that Kenya is the cradle of mankind. You may find yourself having this feeling that you are more at home here than from where you come from. Please understand that this is where we all started, and we can tell you, welcome home. And it is inspiring to be here to witness Africa's judicial leadership as you mobilize your judicial authority, intellectual power, and moral commitment to intervene in our generation's defining struggle. I am highly encouraged to note the depth of thought in your appreciation of the existential magnitude of climate change and of the imperative for urgent action by all stakeholders anchored on common institutional coordination. Although climate change is a universal existential threat, there is good reason for Africa's institutions and leadership to drive the agenda of mitigating its effects and eliminating the human activity that is driving it. The first reason is the fact that Africa is by far the least polluting continent, yet it is by far the most adversely affected by climate change. The entirety of industrial and economic activity from all of the continent's economies contributes less than 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. These emissions are the cause of a steady and dangerous rise in global temperatures, which have resulted in the extinction of plants and animal species, rise in sea levels, disruptions in climate patterns, drought, and desertification. The brunt of these adverse effects and impacts has been borne by vulnerable African populations residing in less developed parts of the world. Droughts are more frequent and more severe. Our region has undergone a 5-season-long drought, which has decimated domestic and wild animal populations, wiped out food crops, disrupting and threatening the lives of millions of people. Water stress caused by climate change has been devastating, both directly and as a driver of conflict over water and pastures. Poverty has been exacerbated by loss of livestock, which forms the mainstay of pastoralist economic livelihoods, and massive crop failure, which weakened the foundations of farming economies. In addition to drought, African populations are experiencing floods, heat waves, and outbreak of climate change-related diseases. African livelihood, security and development is in danger and will remain at stake unless we collectively wage aggressive combat to reverse the situation through policies and other institutional action to implement mitigation, enhance adaptation, and build resilience. The looming climate disaster is particularly tragic for Africa, which is entering a new, promising era of peace and prosperity as the continent of the future. Many vital indicators affirm that indeed Africa is rising, powered by its youthful population, energy, resources, and hope. It is important for Africa to undertake concerted action to win the war on climate change because it is disproportionately affected by its adverse impacts and also because necessary global responses to climate change are going to institute structural change. The institutional configurations and economic resets emanating from this structural change will install Africa not only as a continent of the future, but as the world's green economic superpower. Africa is abundantly endowed with all the resources required to power green industrialization. Our clean and green power potential is incomparable. Just to give you indications, 92% of our grid in Kenya is clean and green. It is the case in many other African countries, and the potential to make it the case in many African nations is real and is possible. Our clean and green power potential, as I said, is immense. Hydro, geothermal, wind, and solar power potential is super abundant. The mineral resources needed for green energy technology also exists plentifully in our continent. We are the world's youngest continent, with a mean age of 25 and growing younger every year. Our people constitute a 3 billion strong market and a pool of skilled, motivated, and capable workforce. Future global sustainability will depend on a robust engagement with Africa in many fundamental ways. The world knows this, and African institutions and stakeholders must be ready for this engagement. And that is why this symposium is very important. I am very proud of the firm commitment demonstrated by the African Union in this matter. At COP27, which was held last November in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, Africa's voice was clear. The development path taken by the world's economic and industrial powers is unsustainable and prejudicial to Africa and the global South. Climate change has brought home that fact in sobering detail. Africa is emphatic that although prosperity is an urgent goal to liberate our people from the indignity of poverty and inequality, the path of pollution is not an option. The African Union prefers a more ecologically responsible industrialization, one that promotes multi-sectoral climate resilience in agriculture and food systems, water resources, energy, transport and infrastructure, among others. We also insist quite firmly that international development financing must be more appropriate for the needs of our existential moment in terms of how much resources is accessible, affordable, and adequate. In February, I was encouraged to witness the impressive level of activity accomplished by African group of negotiators, especially at COP27, as well as the various African climate change initiatives. The Committee of African Heads of State and Governments on Climate Change, which I chair, also coordinates various African climate change commissions that are doing extremely important work in many regions of our continent to implement the Africa climate change and green recovery agenda. I'm also honored to lead Kenya's participation in these regional, continental, and climate actions. It is a privilege to join our African brothers and sisters in this good fight and make our contribution to the defining struggle of our generation. Africa is alive to the imperative of this moment in a way that is simply inspiring. I will share with you Kenya's experience of this journey so far. From the very inception, our aspirations for economic development and shared prosperity has been inextricably tied to a firm commitment to environmental sustainability. In my earlier statement, I did paint the picture of where we are as a continent. I mean, the power of industrialization that has been premised on fossil fuels, despite its adverse effects, is what has driven industrialization in the world so far. The world today is at a crossroads. The crossroads being, do we continue the fossil fuel-powered industrialization, which is destroying